Welcome, Professor Taddeo. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Of course. So I'm Rosaria Taddeo. I'm Professor of Digital Ethics and Defense Technologies at the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford. And I'm also the DSTL Ethics Fellow at the Alan Turing Institute. DSTL is the research branch of the Ministry of Defense in the UK. More importantly, I'm a philosopher working on digital technologies and their governance.
Oh, but I want to add that you are the only professor of digital ethics and defense technologies and the only female professor of defense technologies at all.
Within Oxford, I'm not sure globally, but yes, within Oxford. It's a combination that is central, I believe, in the time that we're living now, the combination of technologies and defense, and so understanding the ethical implications is crucial. So that's why we chose this title. And then, you know, women are feisty, so it was time that some women took defense as part of their job line.
As a philosopher, you started working in this field very early on. What attracted you to defense?
Well, I started off working on digital technologies. Well, at the time it was called computer technologies, ICTs, about 20 years ago. And the idea was that philosophers are philosophers of their time, and they change the world around them with the strengths of their thoughts. And when I started working on philosophy, the ICTs, the information and communication technologies, were starting to become the mark of our time. So I wanted to work on these technologies as a way of working on my own time, the era I was living in. And I believe that there are two ways that technologies can change societies, as we've seen in terms of digital innovation and, you know, all the topics that we hear now every day. But also, defense and wars are another strong drive that changes the world in which we live. The way societies wage war is an indication of the kind of values and rights they respect. And wars can be a way through which new forces are unleashed, and so history is made. And so it seemed the perfect combination to study technology and defense, to see how the world was changing, and then trying to contribute to this change by making sure that values and principles will be respected throughout the process.
Something practical. What do you like the most about your work? In a daily context.
Well, there are several things. There is the proper philosophical work, which is about thinking about new phenomena and trying to follow the threads that take you to a problem, or to trying to discover some questions or issue that has not been solved or seen before, and then working with these puzzles, trying to put pieces together so that you can achieve a solution. There's this kind of theoretical thinking that I enjoy the most. Then there is my work is very much applied. So all this theoretical thinking has to lead to some kind of practical solution or actionable recommendations. And I work a lot with practitioners within the MOD, but also NATO at times. And I like the interactions with practitioners because it's always challenging from an intellectual point of view. And then I'm lucky enough to be working with younger generations, my students, research assistants, postdocs. And that also is challenging from an intellectual, but also from an anthropological point of view, I'd say. But it's also very much enriching because there's always new perspectives and, you know, fresh thinking that makes the day much more interesting, if not challenging sometimes.
You have just published a book entitled The Ethics of Artificial Intelligence in Defense. What are the key findings?
So the book says a few important findings. The starting point is that we think about artificial intelligence and defense sometimes as if it were some kind of a sci-fi scenario or sci-fi idea, no? The Terminator and all sorts of things. It's not what this is about. The starting point is noticing that AI and defense are two forces that are getting more and more intertwined. And that AI is changing the whole spectrum of defense operations. It's not just about the drones, the so-called killer robots. It's also about the cyber. It's also about intelligence analysis. It's also about how Ministry of Defense or defense forces organize themselves. AI is also useful to understand how many bottled waters you need to ship during an operation, so to speak, to give you an example. So the starting point is already a funding, because it tells us that there is a reality there, which is not sci-fi, but is still very worrying. And then the findings are that the use of AI in defense, which is happening, the Ukrainian war has been like a watershed in this area, and we know now that AI is applied to under 60 degrees, but it's happening in a complete regulatory and governance vacuum. So war and defense are two areas, and I distinguish war and defense as in war is one of the activities that defense engage in. So defense is a broader domain. But these two, let's say, activities, defense and war, they are some of the activities that are regulated the most in international humanitarian laws. Think about all the Geneva Convention, think about just war theory, the ethical theory that supports activities in wars. And yet, this latest transformation of defense and war, which AI and more broadly digital technologies are pushing forward, is completely not regulated. We have no one law that specify what standards AI should abide to when it's adopted by a defense organization. We have no regulation in terms of what is a legitimate target in the context of cyber. We have no regulation for autonomous weapon systems, which are basically drones or robots empowered by AI. So the first finding is that there is a huge regulatory gap, which needs to be closed, of course. For one of the reasons I say before, the way societies wage war is an indication of the values and rights that society want to respect, commits to respect. So especially if you are a liberal democracy, waging a war using AI, which poses a lot of ethical problems, severe risks, as we saw in the past few years, without this regulation, it is fundamentally disturbing, I would say, not just problematic, because it's de facto breaching values and rights that we stand there to defend. The defense is there to protect. So this is one of the main findings. And then there are more specific findings in terms of, not to speak for too long, but on the one side, ethics and ethical thinking about AI in defense shows that there are potential uses of these technologies, particularly in the cyber, which could be leveraged more, and regulation should support more. So there are opportunities there that we should take when it comes to AI, and there is an ethical thinking that supports this kind of uses. And then in other domains, we should be much more careful. So in other applications, we should be much more careful. For example, when it comes to autonomous weapon systems, the key aspect there is to show that the key findings there is to show that so far the debate on the permissibility of autonomous weapon systems, so whether we as society think is a good thing, has been polarized between those that think that these weapons breach human dignity because you cannot and should not delegate the decision to take a human life to a machine, and then mostly those who work for defense forces who argue that these weapons will protect and save the life of the combatants, so we should use them. I find this polarization problematic because all it has done is to stall the debate and to foster this vacuum, which has then led to the use of these machines and weapons in Ukraine and before that in Libya. So the main solution that I suggest there is to switch approach and to start talking about risks and risk threshold that we as society feel comfortable taking when it comes to the use of these machines. This does not mean that we should consider them permissible. It means only that we should shift to the criteria to which we assess this permissibility, with the aim of finding some common ground on which both sides of this debate can talk and finally move over this polarization, which leads to nothing but just a huge vacuum of regulations that then allows all sorts of immoral uses of these machines. So these are the main findings of the book.
Okay, let's deepen some points, go deeper. So first of all, AI is a technology that works without being intelligent. Why do some people confuse it with science fiction?
But the name doesn't help. Let's put it this way: if you call something artificial intelligence, it tends to confuse non-experts. But the name has also, the origin of the name is basically some key figures in the field. They were putting together a proposal to get some funding for a workshop, and they call it artificial intelligence rather than computers trying to mimic cognitive activities of a human being or that sort of things. It was a catchy phrase that for once in the academia proved to be very effective. There is nothing intelligent in them. I think that those who confuse AI, artificial intelligence, for some form of intelligence, they either naive or they have an agenda. I take those who push this idea that AI might become intelligent at some point, as humans are intelligent, or as plants are intelligent, as it were, as a way of distract the public debate from key issues that needs to be addressed. So it works like pretty much the little toy that you play in front of the children when they need to get vaccinated. You distract them from the present danger, the present phenomenon. So let's talk about when machines will become intelligent, and then in the meantime we forget about standards for safety, levels of control, levels of transparency we have, how do we attribute responsibilities for the actions that this machine performs. So all sorts of very complex, very interesting and impactful questions, which will lead eventually to regulations and boundaries to the use of these machines. They get sideway when people trying to push narrative which are not based on any scientific reality, and it doesn't help also the fact that in computer science the use or the language to describe machine learning and describe artificial intelligence is full of metaphorical uses of cognitive terminology. So we think about, we say machine learning, and that word brings in a lot of cognitive way. Some time ago, OpenAI released a model say that it was thinking. It is not thinking, but it's a metaphorical use of language which contributes to the conceptual confusion. But don't believe in it. It's a distraction. It's a false advertising, I would say.
Okay, as you said, world today is digitalized, and the physical and cyber elements are intertwined. Can you describe the different ways in which AI can be used in war? You don't have to say everything, but just mention some.
Indeed, several ways. Let's start from. So there are different ways in which defense organization can use artificial intelligence, different purposes. So let's identify. The book identifies 3 categories. So one is, for example, what is called a sustainment and support. When you use a technology to sustain and support the internal processes of an organization. So as I said before, defense organization can use AI for HR or for logistics, but you can also use AI for intelligence analysis. These days, defense is digitalized first and foremost because we know that all the data that we all share on the internet, from social media to web tracking, from satellite images, they all contain precious information for defense, the defense sector, and for decision making. To give you an example, when the Ukraine war started, an app was developed so that Ukrainian citizens could send pictures of Russian troops moving around or to take records of war crimes. These pictures are then collected and analyzed to provide intelligence to the Ministry of Defense in Ukraine. Without AI, this will not be possible because we have the data, but it will be very hard to analyze all this data and extract information. So AI is supporting intelligence analysis. At the same time, in cyber is a key element of defense in these days. It's not separated from it, it's integrated. We haven't seen it in the first days of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. I talk about this war because it's the one where the shift is more evident. But throughout the war, we've seen a lot of cyber attacks going on, particularly against governmental infrastructures in Ukraine. AI is crucial because it does two things. It's a double-edged sword to some extent. It is crucial to improve the resilience and security of the systems, because it can monitor systems and then it can identify attacks as they come in. But it's also a tool that you can use to develop new attacks, new cyber weapons. So it's also for the offensive cyber, as it were. And then we have, of course, the so-called kinetic uses. So when you use AI to power weapons, so to identify targets, select targets, and then execute a payload. These are all sorts of issues. Then I think that these are all very problematic. One more aspect to consider is when we use AI for decision making, both tactical and strategic decisions. We've seen this, for example, in the war in Gaza, where Israel used 2 AI systems to identify targets within Gaza. And this is a very problematic use because it revealed a lot of the things that we should focus on. The suggestion proposed by the AI systems were validated by human operators, who only had seconds to see whether the information was correct or not. This is by no means sufficient time to assert whether an AI decision is correct. So it points to identifying the right procedures and the right processes internally to an organization to adopt AI systems for making decision-making, for support decision-making, but also in a way that, leaves time for human judgment to be properly formed and implemented. The systems were adopted despite records showed that they would have 10% of false positives. This is very problematic because it breaches the principle of distinction between combatants and non-combatants. 10% is a huge number in defense, where necessity and distinction impose much stronger boundaries. So the uses are really 360 degrees. They are not all negative. I think that, for example, the use of AI for intelligence analysis is important because it supports strategies. Cyber is, I think, an element that needs to be strengthened because you can wage in cyber conflicts in ways that they will not escalate perhaps afterwards. So there is an opportunity there. In the context of kinetic combat, so the boots on the ground, as it were, it remains very problematic to have these decisions delegated to machines for many reasons. But even if we don't want to think about the dignity argument, I think it remains problematic because we do not control machines empowered by AI 100%. So we leave a chance that something might go wrong, and we know that that chance is there, and it's not the chance that we have when we have a weapon and the weapon breaks down, or it's a different sort of chance. Is the chance that knowing that machines might learn something we didn't want it to learn, and might do something that we didn't want it to do. Despite that, we still use it to do one of the most severe things that humans can do on this planet, which is killing another human being. So it's really all the way around, I would say, that AI is changing defense. And none of these uses comes without ethical questions and challenges that go from privacy, bias, control, attribution of moral responsibilities. And these questions are all not addressed at the moment. But it's not in the book.
But tell us, why should we bother with ethics when the opponent doesn't?
So there are different ways in which you can answer this question. It is a question that is quite common from practitioners in the area. Let's start from an ethical point of view. We have distinguished. Well, there is. Let me put it this way. There is a wonderful sentence in Michael Walt's book on Just War Theory, where he says that it's from the restraint of war that the seeds of peace will emerge. So it's the boundaries, the limits to which we put war that creates the occasion of peace. And peace has to be the objective of any goal, of any war. Otherwise, we're not talking about war, but of an international crime. So the first reason why we want to focus about ethics is because ethics will give us some boundaries that will allow us to build peace afterwards. So this is the first one. The second one is that ethics is not just about the boundary itself. It's about also identifying opportunities, as we mentioned before, that are new in front of us, and we need to identify, but also strategize as they might come with some risk. So it's a balancing act that defense need as any other domain. Collecting a lot of data to extract information to support defense operation is a good thing, but it also implies breaches of privacy. It might pose this question of mass surveillance. So how far do we go? How the advantage that we gain justify the breaches to rights that we pose? This is an ethical question, and to take the opportunity, we need to have this kind of ethical thinking, unless we want to breach all the values and principles that are at the foundation of our societies. And this is the third element. If you are a liberal democracy, your defense forces are there to protect the values underpinning your societies. If you wage a war by breaching those very values and rights, then you are no different from your opponent. At that point, there is no need for a war. You just joined a bunch of authoritarian, terroristic, criminal, the villains of the world, because you sided with them, you acted like them. I often refer to von Clausewitz's book here. It's one of the first chapters. He says that war, more than an art or a science, is an activity of society. And he meant it because he was thinking about international relations and these relational aspects of war. But I think it also means that as it is a social activity, as it is an activity of our society, it is the benchmark of how serious we are about the values that we say we respect and uphold. So if liberal democracies take the opportunity of AI without thinking about the risk, without thinking about the problems that it might pose, then the reality is that we would have to consider that our values are not that serious anymore, or they are not protected as much as we think they are. It becomes a very hypocritical game. So there is also this kind of elements there. To put it bluntly, you do not fight terrorists becoming a terrorist. You do not fight an authoritarian regime becoming an authoritarian regime. That's not the point. So ethics is there. It's important. It's there because of all these reasons. And it's an important question, the one you ask. I get it a lot. It's a frequent one. I get this one and the opposite one, which is the pacifist, who, of course, think the war is one of the most despicable activities humans might engage with. They think there should be no ethics of AI in defense because there should be no defense at all. I don't agree with this position. Just to close the cycle of these questions, because some wars are justified. There is a right to self-defense. The whole point is that when you defend yourself, you don't, you do not breach values and rights, because at that point you are as wrong as the other side. So this is crucial, I think.
So this is the question. War is evil, so why ethics at all? So this is what you mean, no?
Yes.
We were all pacifists earlier days.
I mean, it's an idealistic position with which I would not disagree. I mean, of course, war is horrible and should be avoided at all costs. But I come from a country that had its own citizens fighting other citizens for the cost of democracy, and that war was justified, in my view, because it was a form of self-defense against the German army here, the Nazi army in Italy, but also against the opponent who had allied with those armies. So I think that to be a great lesson of how some form of conflict sometimes are justified. The whole point is that once the decision to go to war is justified, you behave accordingly to some principles and values, because it is not true that in war and love everything is allowed. Some things are definitely not allowed, and this is the area on which I want to work, or on which this book focuses on. So let's say I'm a defeated pacifist, as it were. So it's not that I'm against pacifism. I think that sometimes the arguments doesn't stand.
Yes, I agree. Tell us something about human dignity in this context.
So human dignity is a fundamental value. It's not even a principle, it's a value that we need to protect. And in more, well, as in other contexts, we touched upon human dignity briefly when talking about autonomous weapon systems, but human dignity is more central in the context of the ethics of war. Because it's the human dignity of the non-combatants, but it's the human dignity also of the combatant that needs to be respected. And human dignity needs to be respected at all times because it is one fundamental element to maintain the morality of war. Let's put it this way: we need, even when we wage war, we should show some form of respect to our opponents, whether the combatants or the non-combatants, to make sure exactly to what Michael Wald says, to maintain that kind of narrow path that then might lead to peace. One of the reasons, for example, then we go back to human dignity, that supports, let's say, the restraints of the use of autonomous weapon systems is that if only one side uses those machines, the other side will feel that there is no dignity in the way the war is waged. And so even if the war is won at some point, there will be no endurable peace because the defeated side will feel that the victory is unfair, it has no value in itself. So human dignity is important because it implies the respect of humans. And this means that, for example, the combatants who go to war, so the soldiers or those who might join as a form of resistance, in other words, should never be treated in a cavalier way. That their life, even if they, by joining a conflict, you kind of accept the risk of being wounded or killed. But this does not mean that you should expect to be wounded or killed in a randomic, casual way. This should be always the result of some kind of intentional, necessary, and proportionate operation. So, for example, the respect of dignity in this case means that there are no uses of digital technologies or of offensive capabilities that leave some room to chances to, what might happen in an unpredictable way. That's because we need to respect the combatant as well. Soldiers should not be casual victims of violence. Dignity means also the respect of the non-combatants, and so putting them in armed ways when this is not necessary or in a disproportionate way. There's also, among other things, a huge breach of their dignity. And eventually, and I think this is the thing we were mentioning before, it is demeaning, it is considered demeaning that a human life is taken as a result of a machine taking that decision. And it is demeaning because there is no understanding in the machine, in AI systems, of what does it mean to take a life. There is no understanding of the machine and of the value of their life or the implication of the pain that this will cause, moral and physical pain. And so, as you see, it's dignity is a thread that is all over these uses of this machine. You could argue that we protect privacy, thinking about the uses of AI, for example, for intelligence analysis. We mentioned that privacy is a breach, is a risk of being breached. No? The breach of privacy is also a question for dignity because we take privacy as a right that protect our own dignity. And so if we breach privacy too much, we might also violate the dignity of people involved. So it's fundamental. It is a fundamental value that needs to be protected in every activity of defense and war.
You were mentioning the action of autonomous weapon systems and the moral responsibility in this case. Could you expand a bit on this?
So there are different aspects to this topic. We know that machines, AI-powered machines, they cannot be held morally responsible for the actions that they perform. Because they don't understand what they do, because they don't have intentionality. And intentionality is a key element to attribute moral responsibility. The question then is, well, if machines are not, who is morally responsible for the actions that these machines perform? And moral responsibility as an individual responsibility is important in war. There is one extract from the Nuremberg trial where the judges say we need to attribute responsibility to individuals, not just to organizations. This is crucial to the morality and the justness of war. So who is then responsible? And this opens a kind of worms that you cannot imagine, because we have two problems with AI machines. On the one side, these technologies are produced in a very much distributed way. So some people curate the database, some other people do the design, and then there is a development which might be done by other people. And then people move and change countries, companies, some people retire, some other go to different jobs. Reverse engineering, who did what? When we want to understand the causal relation between an output and an input, is very problematic from a traceability point of view. But even if that was possible, it would mean nothing for the attribution of moral responsibility, because artificial intelligence is kind of unique as a technology in that it is unpredictable. Once you deploy a system that can learn, you cannot know what it will learn in all possible circumstances. So this is something that Wiener would already say in the late 50s. At some point, the machine buffers the programmer, because it's a machine that learns from the environment. And if the environment is very complex, and the design is not super specific, or the machine at some point evolves over and over, it might pick up on aspects that the designers and developers did not consider. And so it might do something that not only we did not predict, but that we never intended. And this is where the trouble begins, because it means that not only we have little control of these machines, but also that when something goes wrong, it might be something that goes wrong out of no intentionality whatsoever. So nobody can be held morally responsible for this. Now, this is problematic in any domain, but imagine if an autonomous weapon systems, which should be deployed knowing that non-combatants will never be put intentionally in armed ways, that nobody is killed in a cavalier way, so randomically, and then the machines learn something that it was never intended, or there is an input in the environment that was not considered. And that's something that breaches any of these two principles of just war theory. We would have a huge war crime in front of us and a moral problem, but we will not be able to hold anybody morally responsible. Legally responsible, I imagine a lawyer jumping on the chair and saying, well, you can decide that is the higher rank officer that is this or that. But the legal element does not meet or satisfies the request for a moral responsibility, which is crucial, because going back to the idea of morality of war, having a war where the actions do not lead to a moral responsibility of the individuals is the utmost way of breaching the morality of war. No, it's like having a beast with no head. It becomes horrendous, even more horrendous than it is. So this is the problem here. In the book, I suggested a possible solution, which only works for machines for autonomous weapon systems that are used in environments where we know that risks are very little, like submarine warfare, where you know that there are no non-combatants, because if you are in a submarine, you might be a combatant. So very specific scenario, not the ones that we might consider these days. We might shift by saying that people might do a so-called moral gambit. So officers might accept, you cannot give this responsibility, you have to take it, offer it, as it were, from yourself. Accept that the moral value will be judged accordingly to the outcomes of these machines. And they take a gambit. That means knowing that they might be held more responsible for things they never intended or predicted. But this only covers specific uses. It cannot be used widely, because nobody should make a gambit on the life on other people, even a moral gambit. So it's a partial solution. But I think this is a crucial problem to highlight, because it contributes to the debate on the regulation of autonomous weapon systems. I think once this predictability issue is brought to light, as it were, or becomes more evident, and once the risks, the predictability question is not a question about human dignity directly, it's a question about risk and control. It becomes, the boundaries of the use of these technologies becomes more clear, and perhaps there can be a more constructive debate than the one we have had so far, in terms of whether and how we use these machines in war. Sorry, this is a topic that monopolizes often the debate, and there is much more to it, but I think it's a crucial one. It's also a little bit annoying because, you know, there is the UN CCW group that works on autonomous weapon systems. But after many years, about 12 years of this group, we still have not even a shared definition of what these weapons are. So the debate is really stalled at a very early stage. And I think we cannot afford anymore this gap and this lack of guidance after the war in Ukraine, after the war in Gaza.
Okay, but there is another space that is very important, another part of cyber. This is the cyberspace. And in chapter 8, you outline a new theory of deterrence for cyber warfare tailored to the nature of cyberspace. This is becoming also very important. Can you explain a little bit about this?
Yeah, so when we think about deterrence, we think immediately about nuclear, no? So this is how we learned deterrence in the past century. Actually, deterrence is a bit wider than nuclear. So nuclear deterrence is based on assured mass destruction. So if you launch your bomb, I'll launch my bomb, and by the time your bomb arrives, my bomb will also arrive. Everybody will be dead. So nobody does anything. But deterrence also happens in other ways. So, you know, the military parades are a form of deterrence because they are signaling to the opponents of a state that we have capabilities. So you better not think of attacking us because we might respond in an appropriate way. History of a state is also a form of deterrence because if over the history a state proves to be rather aggressive or to be able to defend itself, that creates a reputation that might deter others from attacking. Deterrence is a condition of threat. A threat, I'll do X if you will dare to do Y. Now, this theory works very well in kinetic conflicts, so conflicts which have a physical element. In cyber, it does not work because in cyber, you cannot do a military parade with your cyber capabilities because the moment you declare what your capabilities are, they are voided. They are not worth anymore. And also in cyber, defense is not really as good as it is in other domains, like physical, because every digital system can be breached. Every digital system that is attacked at some point will be breached. It's a matter of time, efforts, and determination. So basically, it's a matter of how the opponent is determined to do it. So defense doesn't work. Signaling, like the parade in cyber, do not work. So one would say, well, deterrence does not work in cyberspace. My argument in this chapter is that this form of deterrence doesn't work in cyberspace. In the chapter, I argue that because in cyber, conflicts have non-kinetic aspects, or cyber conflicts are such insofar as they do not lead to physical consequences, we can have an argument, an ethical argument, to justify a more assertive or aggressive behavior. And so my argument is that deterrence in cyber works if we accept that once an attacker wants to attack, they will. But if we're able to respond in a very assertive way, so prevailing the attack, which means not defending us, but trying to trace the attacker and respond to the attacker with another attack, we might cause enough economic damage and moral damage to avoid the next round of attack. So deterrence in cyber works and is ethically acceptable if it shifts from preventing to prevailing. And the argument there is that as long as there are no physical consequences, so this is the crucial premise, by having a more assertive way in cyber, we might foster stability in cyberspace. We might keep the bad guys, as it were, more bounded, we might get them to stand off a bit more. And this is a crucial priority these days, because cyber as an environment is characterized by a very high level of conflictual activities. It is a domain which we say is weaponized, because everybody acquires offensive capabilities before acquiring defensive capabilities. So I think there is an argument for being more aggressive, as you were, insofar as we have boundaries, serious boundaries for this aggression not to lead to any physical damage. So this means both technical skills, but also means, again, international regulations. It means international standards, which again in cyber are still lacking to quite an extent. So it's another area where we have decided not to establish any international regulations yet. Hopefully this will change in the next few years, but we'll see.
Okay, let's talk about security, cybersecurity and space security. A couple of years ago in a talk, you were mentioning that cybersecurity should be handled as a public good. How about cybersecurity in times of war?
Even more. What we see is an increasingly blurring of the distinction between civilian and defense digital infrastructures. Imagine that OpenAI, which is the company producing ChatGPT, a few weeks ago, December 2024, signed an agreement with a major defense contractor in the US. Google provides cloud services to the Ministry of Defense. Amazon provides cloud services to defense forces. There is an increasingly intertwining of civilian capabilities with defense capabilities. This means that civilian infrastructures become, for example, targets of cyber attacks. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, because as I was saying before, in the past years, or decades, we haven't defined any regulation for example, red lines or threshold in cyber. So we have treated cybersecurity questions at an international level always as forms of cyber espionage or sabotage, which are not regulated. But this is not tenable going forward. So the cybersecurity is even more relevant and even more central in times of war, conflicts, but even international tension, because cyber is one of the first areas where skirmishes happens. You you think about Russia versus US, China versus US, or even Europe, how Europe was targeted by Russian affiliated group with cyber attacks in the early days of the Ukrainian war. So cybersecurity becomes increasingly more central. I think it should be treated as a public good for two reasons. One is that I think it's no controversial anymore that cyber is becoming an infrastructure of our societies, like our roads or hospitals or schools. And we want these infrastructures to be secure and safe, so we pay taxes for that to happen. Cyber is no different. We work with cyber, we learn with cyber, we run our economy also with cyber. If you think about all the commerce that is there, all the data that we exchange. So the security of cyberspace should be something that is not anymore on the shoulder of the private actors alone. And this is not because, so the reason why this is, I think, desirable is because the digital tools that we use, they are not just produced by major companies who can afford top-level security services, but we have a lot of SMEs, small, medium enterprise, startups, which provide tools that we use every day. If there's from the small Internet of Things technology that we all buy quite cheaply online, from, if you want to use a company that is in your country rather than a multinational companies, for them, security is a huge cost and sometimes might not be a priority. So there is to be a way in which states can intervene and level the playing field, making sure that we have the highest security for all the technologies we use. In the early days, when I started working in this area, people would say that, once your toaster or your fridge are connected on the web, they become something that can be leveraged by criminals to set your house on fire or to create some sort of damage. we are at that point. So we all carry some elements there. So security needs to become cybersecurity needs to be something in which states invest. And then let me say one more thing. We all remember the attacks on the pagers in Lebanon a few months ago.
Yeah.
Those attacks are very important because they show that cybersecurity is not simply, the firewall is not simply the software-based element. It implies a wider set of activities in which states have to have a strong presence, because the pager attack showed that you can run a cyber attack by polluting the supply chain. And the supply chain is something on which states need to have control. It's about security, and it's about checking all the steps of the way in which cyber technologies, digital technologies are provided. So that attack shows that cybersecurity needs to become a public good, not only because states need to shoulder some of the cost, but also because they need to shoulder some of the responsibilities, some of the tasks. We should stop treating cyber as this entirely, let's say, privately owned domain, which is provided only by private sector for commercial purposes. It's become much more than that. So I think that implies the state actors need to have a much stronger role in it. And it should be desirable also because given the level of dependency that we have on this infrastructure, it's also important that state actors become accountable for when things go wrong. It gives more rights and protection to users and citizens, I believe.
So talking about dependence, we should mention social media. And from Cambridge Analytica and Brexit and Musk nowadays supporting the far right around the world, this is really becoming a real danger to democracy. Should we quit all the social media? This would be not really possible. How do you see it?
No, I don't think we should quit social media, even if, I mean, I find it increasingly more demeaning as a service. No, I think we should, again, go back to thinking about these services as infrastructural services for our society. And if you provide an infrastructure, you become responsible even if before, the legal responsibility, you have a civic responsibility. There is one word which was famous in the 50s and 60s. It was the gatekeeper. Mothers were the gatekeepers of the family because they would decide what food to buy, how much to spend, how to prioritize domestic budget. They had a responsibility. If you provide a social media network or platform, you are gatekeeping. You are gatekeeping attention of people because these technologies, this service work by leveraging our attention. You are gatekeeping data because they collect data that they resell. You are gatekeeping advertising. You are gatekeeping information. This gatekeeping role comes with a civic responsibility that these companies must not only accept but respect and discharge correctly. And I worry that the signs that we see in the past months after the election of Trump as president of the US, they seem to go all the opposite direction. So, for example, removing content moderation from Meta, as Zuckerberg announced, it is very problematic because even if you could possibly agree that AI-based or automatic content moderation is not the ideal solution, it was some form of solution or measure put in place there. The fact that it is removed without providing an alternative, I find it very problematic. It is very problematic because eventually the responsibility not to circulate disinformation, the responsibility not to have content which is illegal or disturbing, and there are plenty of these instances. I mean, YouTube, for example, used to have video encouraging anorexia or self-harming activities. So we are talking about concrete issues here. The responsibility of stopping or at least not sharing further this information falls back on the users. And while I think the users need to be more informed and better educated about the way they access these services, it is not fair to download or to offload all this weight on them. There should be some form of support in these activities. To put it bluntly, if the business model is to use my attention to collect my data and offer me, show me information which is mostly advertising, in this cycle of business model, which might be acceptable or not, depending on where you stand, there is a step where you take responsibility for what you show me, because indeed I'm offering already my time and my attention. So you have responsibility about what you show me in this kind of process. So I don't think we should stop. It's feasible to think that people will stop using it, because they've also become elements through which we run our daily activities. It's not just about entertaining, like people who are on the job market, people who are looking. When the University of Oxford looks for volunteer for surveys of experiments, one of the announcements is made on social media. So it is unfeasible, but I think there has to be a lot of attention on the way they are run, these services. In Europe, we are lucky because there is a framework which is emerging and is very much well articulated about how these actors should behave. I am a bit worried that the power of this framework might be undermined by the new administration in the US. So it becomes a delicate balance that needs to be watched very carefully. I wrote an article at some point where I said thinking in absurd terms, so it might not happen, but suppose that the new administration decides to allow companies to detract from their taxes any fine the European Union might give them for breaching any of the regulations, then the framework will immediately lose any weight. The sovereignty of Europe will be immediately breached. So there are these sorts of risks we should be think about these days.
Thank you very much for pointing to this.
So it gets very glim when we think about
no, but,
in this way.
No, but we need to talk about reality, not about something else. So thank you for all these fascinating insights. Now the last three questions. What are your plans for the future?
Develop new research, which is, as it is new research, I don't know yet where it will take me. So at the moment, I'm reading and thinking a lot. So we'll see. If we see each other in another 6 months, perhaps I have a better answer. But the book was published in December, and it really summarizes a lot of the work in the past couple of decades. So I take it to be like a kind of milestone, and now perhaps I can look at other topics or questions. So still wondering.
Yeah, as you mentioned, since Trump next Monday will take over in 6 months, we will talk much about that. Okay, and do you have a message for our users?
So the message is to look at digital innovation, digital services, digital technologies as not just as a service or a product, but as a driver that is shaping the world in which we live in. And this implies looking at it with what we consider a political commitment, not in terms of black or white, red or green, but in terms of look at this as a way in which we can design the societies in which we want to live, and think whether it is going in the direction we would wish for ourselves and the next generation. If not, discuss about it, bring it to the public spaces, make it an agenda in the public debate, because the biggest risk is that all this goes unnoticed and we leave it to a few people to decide how to use one of the most powerful ways we have to change the world these days.
Thank you. And so the last one, if you could have one wish in defense technology, what would it be?
I would like the discourse on defense technologies to be more blunt, as it were, to get all these false dichotomies, all these worries about ethics being an hindrance or defense necessity as a principle to trump everything else, to disappear, so that we could talk clearly, neatly, and straightforwardly about opportunities and risks and how we navigate between the two in an ethical way. Take away all the cultural and political overheads over this debate, just to make it to look at the meat of it, as it were.
Okay, let's hope for that. Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much, Professor Taddeo, and thank you very much for your work. This is
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Clara. Thank you.